Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Ninan. Thank you for joining us. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke made it official today and said he is running for president. The Democrat from El Paso, Texas, is best known for his narrow loss to Senator Ted Cruz in 2018. O'Rourke's campaign raised nearly $80 million in that race, the second most ever for a Senate candidate. And despite losing the race by 200,000 votes, he managed to fuel hype about bigger ambitions, the presidency. O'Rourke rolled out his campaign with a feature in Vanity Fair, including photographs by legendary photographer Annie Leibovitz. The tagline for the article, "I want to be in it. Man, I'm just born to be in it." Well, joining me now to talk about Beto O'Rourke's impact on the 2020 field are CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, editor-in-chief of the Texas Trib, Emily Ramshaw in Austin, and CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist Lynda Tran, who joins us from Washington. She's a partner at the progressive digital firm 270 Strategy. So, Caitlin, I want to start off with you. When you look at this field, it ranges from moderates to centrists. What does this mean?
Well, the big question is, where is Beto going to fit in? You mentioned his Senate campaign, where he raised a ton of money at the grassroots level and really gained national attention. Remember, he got endorsed by Beyonce and LeBron James and really captured the country because he was competing against Senator Ted Cruz. The big question for Beto is whether he's able to translate that star power to a presidential campaign, which is going to be a very different ballgame for him. And there are a lot of questions about where he fits in. In many ways, he appeals to a variety of different constituencies, young people, some progressives, even some moderates. But where he can kind of carve out a niche for himself in this very crowded, very diverse field, I think, will be the question that voters are looking at.
Emily, President Trump was asked about Beto O'Rourke today. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think he's got a lot of hand movement. I've never seen so much hand movement. I said, is he crazy or is that just the way he acts? So I've never seen hand movement. I watched him a little while this morning doing, I assume it was some kind of a news conference. And I've actually never seen anything quite like it. Study it. I'm sure you'll agree.
Who's the bigger threat, Beto O'Rourke or Joe Biden?
I just say whoever it is, I'll take them on. I think it's going to be tough for somebody, but you know what? Whoever it is, it makes no difference to me whatsoever.
Okay, the president's clearly confident, Emily, but it appears so is O'Rourke. Does the former congressman really have the ability to frame himself nationally? And do you think it's just he frames himself as being the anti-Trump candidate? Is that enough?
I'm not sure it is enough. I mean, I think the big question is whether Beto O'Rourke is going to be a bomb or a bottle rocket. In Texas, he was really able to sort of harness this power, this grassroots attention. We've seen other candidates be able to do that nationally. I mean, I think it's a little too early to know what kind of appeal he's going to find. Can his fundraising keep pace? It was record-breaking, as you all have said, in the Senate campaign. Does that keep pace nationally? Does the sort of viral flavor that has powered him so well in Texas power him nationally?
That's a big question. Lynda, you look at this Vanity Fair piece, there's a part talking about how O'Rourke is aware of perhaps his biggest vulnerability, the fact he's a white man in a Democratic Party that's yearning for a woman, potentially a person of color. He says that the only way that he knows to meet that challenge is to make sure his team looks like this country. And he's showing awareness on this issue. I'm also told in Vanity Fair, he says, I'm just born to do this. So is this a big hurdle for him, or is this something that is really not a big deal?
I mean, I think that he is showing a quintessential Beto O'Rourke, and we should all get used to saying Beto, not Beto or Beto or all these other things people have been saying for the last several months. But it's just quintessential him. He's grabbing the bull by the horns. He's saying exactly the answer to the question that people might not be, brave enough to raise. I mean, one thing I will say is a potential challenge for him is that in getting things off the ground several months after other top-tier candidates have done, he is also going to have some challenges in getting some talented, top-notch people of color to help run his campaign. I mean, this is one of the things that has been a point of contention and discussion for all of the campaigns that have announced already in the Democratic field. So if he is really committed to having a team that looks and feels like the rest of the country, he's just coming to it a little bit on the later end.
In January, Caitlin, Beto was actually profiled in the Washington Post, and And in that piece, former Congressman Luis Gutierrez had this to say. He said, very pleasantly surprised to see O'Rourke suddenly interested in immigration last year. Do you think immigration is going to be a defining issue for him?
Well, it can be a huge benefit and it can present liabilities. In that Washington Post article, he really kind of muddled what his response would be to the border crisis, or what the president at the time was calling a border crisis. He also has advocated for tearing down existing barriers with the barrier with Texas and the southern border. He used to represent a border district. He does speak fluent Spanish, and people thought that he would have more sound policies on immigration, or at least had formulated some policy on immigration, and he seemed to kind of muddle his way through that. But it also presents some kind of advantage for him. He says he's going to base his campaign in El Paso, which means he's set apart from the candidates already by having a headquarters in a border district or a border city. And remember, just last month when the president went to visit El Paso to talk about the need for border security, Beto O'Rourke held a dueling rally and got a big crowd size and even got under the president's skin a little bit. So demonstrated some potential benefits for him as well as some potential liabilities.
Emily, you know, he was able to raise nearly $80 million for his campaign against Senator Ted Cruz, a figure who's unpopular with Democrats nationally. Do you think he can replicate that momentum on the national stage?
You know, I mean, toward the end of his Senate campaign, he started seeing a lot of out-of-state donations, some big national donations. I think he proved that he really can raise on a national stage, and I think he proved, you know, kind of like the Bernie Sanders mold, that he can bring in big dollars, you know, without PAC money included, although we already have seen some PACs trying to get motivated on his behalf. You know, I think when people hear him speak, when he's out in the world speaking publicly, his eloquence, the way he speaks is sort of unlike virtually any other candidate, off the cuff, really draws people into his fold. And I think the more he gets out and the more he makes those kinds of connections nationally, the more he's going to see those national fundraising dollars pour in.
Lynda, when you're looking at him as a whole, what do you think his big liability is at this point?
Well, I actually think his big liability is also one of his greatest assets. I mean, when you think about the characteristics that you want in a candidate at any level, much less at the presidential level, we always come back to this word of authenticity. And there's no question that part of the reason that Beto O'Rourke was able to capture lightning in a bottle in 2018 was because he is widely perceived as extremely authentic, and that what you see is what you get. However, now that he's making the pivot into the presidential and he's going to come under the microscope in a way that he wouldn't have last cycle, you know, running against somebody that was pretty vilified across the progressive spectrum, running against Ted Cruz. Now that he's in the national microscope, he's going to have some challenges, and I think that some of the unconventional nature of the way he speaks may come across as lack of discipline or focus, and may actually end up being a liability.
Emily, I want to give you a chance to jump in here.
No, that was exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I think he could be a liability on the national stage in that regard.
All right, Emily Ramshaw, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Lynda Tran, I want to thank all three of you for joining us.